So welcome everybody. I will be talking this morning. I'm based in Scotland, so it is morning here, talking about how to get credit and recognition for method development within research. Obviously with a focus on protocols.io, which is who I'm representing. So let's cover a little bit of housekeeping. The webinar's being recorded, and that's already switched on. Everybody who registered will receive a link to the recording and also will get access to these slides. They'll be sent around either later today or tomorrow. It's a colleague who's actually located in Hawaii who will do that, so it won't be immediate. There will be a question and answer at the end. Please feel free to add questions in the Q&A or even in the chat during the webinar as they occur to you. If I spot them, and I'll answer as I go. If not, I will get to them at the end. And just a pointer to note that we do offer these webinars regularly, along with some other focus webinars around kind of tips and trips, really using functionality in protocols.io. So feel free to sign up for others. And also, if you want more hands-on kind of one-on-one demo to show how to do something very specific, or because you've got more questions, feel free to sign up for a demo. Those which are on European time would be me, but there are other times that work with different time zones, so sign up for any. So excuse me, I'm a bit croaky. Hopefully my voice will last. So a bit of an agenda. We'll talk about credit, methods development in the last century, public sharing of and getting credit for reproducible and discoverable protocols using protocols.io, how this can improve the reliability and impact of your research papers. And I'll show you how you can turn protocols into peer-reviewed papers as well. And we should have time for questions at the end, all going well. So what is credit in research? This is a very brief section just to kind of frame how most research is carried out. At the moment, still, I think the largest focus is on this central piece here. There are all these outputs that are generated by researchers, and that central piece, I think, is still the part which is most recognized as the credit output for researchers, which is the published research article. However, if we think about it in a modular way, around the edges here, a researcher might be generating code. They're almost certainly generating data in some form, whatever that might be, relevant to that research focus. Each of these items will have citations, but also the use of other citations to content that you're referencing. That's also another piece. But the part which I think is less appreciated is the method. And so obviously that's where we're focusing today. This has definitely lagged behind, but all of these are items that you should be receiving or able to receive credit for in the context of research. And so universities or other organizations who are assessing outputs to consider promotion opportunities or to just generally rank researchers, the hope is that they look beyond the research paper and that they are factoring in all of these other pieces of the research cycle, which are equally, if not sometimes more important than the paper itself. So let's have a little think about methods development in the last century. So for a long, long time, all of the research journals we had were very much focused on the story of one piece of research. So something that had happened, it's been investigated, kind of the whole story as a research article in the traditional sense. However, in 2004, Nature launched Nature Methods. So this was the first journal where they were really looking at methods for methods' sake. So we're going back 20 years now. In the inaugural editorial, there was this note here: the goal is to create a highly visible forum for the presentation of novel methods, because we believe that major methodological developments often take their roots in the cross-fertilization of different disciplines. By contrast, the methods sections of specialized journals, although extremely useful for the targeted peer groups, do not grant technical information, the wide exposure conducive to interdisciplinary exchanges. This journal, rather, addresses the broad audience of researchers working in the life sciences. So this was the first time, really, that the publishing community had recognized the potential value of the methods as a standalone piece of credit or research output that could be shared independently of the rest of the application of the methods themselves. Veronique Kierma was the founding editor of Nature Methods. She is now Chief Scientific Officer at PLOS, the Public Library of Science. And in an interview with us, she really talked through about how when that was launched, Nature Methods in 2004, there was a lot of skepticism about this journal. And at the time within Nature Publishing Group, the methods papers were still considered very dismissively. There was a lot of skepticism. They didn't actually think that people would submit. They didn't think that people would want to share just the methods information. There's a really nice podcast interview that we undertook with Veronique a while back that you can access. So I mentioned I'll share the slides. So it was interesting that even, Springer or Nature at that point, it was pre-merger with Springer Nature, they were very skeptical about the value of the journal. So Veronique pushed very hard for this to happen. And of course, since then, we've seen a boom in the last 20 years, and there are now lots more places to share methods as research articles themselves. So Nature Methods, Star Protocols is a Cell Press one. Protocol Exchange is a repository a bit like protocols.io, but it's called Spring Harbor Protocols, Journal of Biological Methods, Methods X. There are lots of other options. This is not exhaustive. This is just to show you a smattering of those options and locations that have opened up in the last 20 years. But it has still lagged behind. So we still don't always see the methods being shared in the way that they should. And also, we don't necessarily see researchers getting credit for those methods. And often a researcher might spend years optimizing a method, perhaps a PhD student, and they run out of time before they're actually able to apply it to a specific research question. And they've spent a lot of time developing the method. And it's really important that optimization of methods part is recognized as a really valuable part of the research process. So we'll jump back to those modular research outputs. As I mentioned, methods have really lagged behind. And so what do I mean by that? So we share a lot of data. We've done quite well at opening up, whoops, don't know what I did then, opening up the community to sharing the data that they generate. So open data has become a big thing. Most journals now have data availability statements. So we have oceans and oceans of data. And if data were these cookies that I'm showing this image of here, these cookies were all made by tweaking the same recipe. So phenotypically, you can see that small changes to the method resulted in phenotypically very different looking, probably tasting as well, cookies. I'm sure texture, thickness, hardness, I'm sure all of that is different of all of these cookies. However, we can only interpret what those phenotypic changes are if we know exactly what the tweaks were that were made to the method. So it's very important that if you're sharing data, you also share the methods that go with them. And that is where protocols.io comes in. So we have a tool and a platform, and our mission is very simple: to make it easy to share method details before, during, and after publication. You can come along and put content onto protocols.io. Everything starts out private until you choose to make it public. But so while it's private, you can share and collaboratively edit content and protocols very much in the same way you could share and collaborate on content using Google Drive. So any Google documents or spreadsheets, or etc. In exactly the same way, you can share with a group, you can share with individuals, you control the privileges that they have. If you choose to make it public, then it is open access. So once you publish and get a DOI, a digital object identifier, the protocols at that point are public. So it's a tool and platform and piece of software. And then it's a repository for open methods as well. So this is just, actually I need to update this. We've changed slightly the look and feel of this. This is, oops, The page that you would come to if you visit protocols.io/welcome. That is a good place to come if you just want to start having a poke around. There are some links to some featured protocols, there's some testimonials, some workspaces. It's a good place to just have a look if you want to just see what it actually looks like and what interaction with the protocols on the platform are like. As I mentioned, it works as an open access repository, and it can serve for all different research disciplines. Absolutely anything that has a step-by-step process can be put onto protocols.io. What the tool works like, there's an editor view, and it's very much a blank template. So in that public capacity, there are 17,000 public protocols. So each of these have DOIs and they can be cited. So they are citable research objects that will be indexed and tracked. If you've linked with an ORCID, they can appear on your ORCID profile as works and output from your research. And there's a lot of visibility. There's also a lot of private content. And so some universities have institutional licenses which give their users and researchers access to be able to create a lot more private content. Publishing, however, can happen for free. Anyone can make an account, have a limited number of private files, and publish without having to pay. So in terms of that public repository, if you want to go and poke around, see if there's any methods that work for you, from that welcome page, there's a search bar, so you can come and interact, look for a method that perhaps would resonate with you. I mean, I've just got PCRs written here as an example, but you know, it could be CRISPR, could be anything that you're working on. If you want to see what's on the platform that might be relevant to your research, come and have a poke around and search. This is now actually a drop down, so you can look for publications, people who might have this as a keyword, and then you can have a look at what flags up. So publications are any publicly posted protocols that are available on the platform. If you find some that might be of interest to you, you can make your own fork, which is your own version of that protocol, and you can run them or adapt them, make changes, etc. And so what the goal is that these protocols are reproducible, they're discoverable, you can come and search, they're indexed, and then I won't let this run the whole way through because it's 2 minutes, but we have a protocol which kind of gives you insight into how to make your protocol more reproducible, discoverable, and user-friendly. So it gives you tips on the things you should do to enhance and increase the visibility of the protocol. So I won't let that run all the way through, but you'll have the link from the slides when we send them to you. If I can get that to go ahead. There we go. So what does it mean if you have the protocol separate from the research article? You can make the content much more discoverable. So on the top left here was a tweet from a researcher in Chile who was looking for RNA extraction method, and they're working on primary cortical neuron cultures, so brain cells. A few tweets later, this was a researcher in Chile who was looking for that. A few tweets later, a postdoc at UCSF pointed to a protocol on protocols.io, RNA extraction protocol. Sounds absolutely perfect. When you look at this protocol, it was otherwise published as a part of this paper on GigaScience, which was a method looking at 3-spine stickleback parasites, so a fish parasite. So if that method hadn't been placed independently of the research article, seems very, very unlikely that the researchers working on brain cells would have found and used that method for their research, because they would never have found it in this paper about a fish parasite, essentially. So that distinction of method from application of method can just mean that the methods themselves become discoverable, that the authors of those methods can receive credit for reuse of the method, never mind reuse of the data in the research paper or the results taken from that paper. The method itself is independently valuable. Those authors can have credit for that alone. So a question about how is a submitted standalone protocol validated in terms of reproducibility? We don't validate those, but it's the community who, if it's published and others reproduce, there's a button that works for me. And so other users who perhaps manage to reproduce a protocol can click that button. So you can get an indicator on the protocol itself that's community driven essentially, and that will help you to see whether it's reproducible or not. What's really nice is that you can add questions and comments onto the protocols when they're public too. So if you hit a snag, you can directly interact with the authors of the protocol that's been made available to ask questions. And sometimes there might be a mistake and you can, it's then self-correcting. It's very dynamic and interactive. But independently from the protocols.io side, we are not validating the methods. We do just scan to make sure no nonsense is being added, but otherwise anything can be posted. It's like a preprint server. There are ways to tie in with journals though, so I'll show you that in a little bit. Early modular sharing fosters collaboration. This is just a nice example to highlight how one researcher, Luciano Martellotto, I think he used to be at Harvard and now he's in Australia. He has been a part of the Human Cell Atlas and done a lot of single cell biology experiments and shared a lot on protocols.io. And in discussion with him recently, he actually said that 80% of recent collaborations have been a direct result of sharing the protocols publicly on protocols.io. So I think especially if you're in a community where method sharing is very, very important, or method development and exploring new ways of trying to do things is very important. It can be a real hub that will spark new connections with people who are working on similar things. So it's a really great way for gaining visibility that way. Improving reliability and impact of your research papers. So I'll run through a little bit of how you can use protocols.io to actually get the DOI and put that into a research paper. So if you have added your protocol to protocols.io with your collaborators, you've managed to undertake the research, you've tweaked and optimized, and you've got the method to the point where it's working really well for you, it's reproducible when you've generated the data for the paper. You can at that point post the protocol publicly onto protocols.io. There are two ways of doing that, and the first is publish, which will make the protocol immediately publicly available with a DOI, so digital object identifier. So any publication in journals, they always have a DOI. It's what's known as a persistent identifier. So when you publish something and it has a persistent identifier, at that point, it is a version that can no longer be changed or edited, essentially. So if you pick publish, you can follow this 6-step process here. There will be things that are required, so title as one, abstract, etc. There will be pieces of metadata that are absolutely required, funder information, authors, and a few other things. Others will be, it's up to you whether you add that information or not. You can choose to share them in specific workspaces on protocols.io and preview, and click through the confirmations. So in the same way that when you post or submit a paper, you're saying that all of your co-authors agree with the posting or the submission of that article, we expect the same here. It's as formal really as posting or submitting a research article. Once you click through those confirmations, if you're somewhere that doesn't have a license, it will enter a screening process. So as I said, we do a quick screen to make sure it's not spam or pseudoscience. We do get those kinds of weird submissions, so we get rid of those, but anything that looks like it's appropriate, we would then click publish, and you would have an email that will tell you it's been published, here is your DOI. So that's very, very easy. That screening process may take a couple of days, but generally it's same day. I mean, I've just done those this morning from Friday evening through. So the longest you would wait would be over a weekend in general, apart from on holidays occasionally. Reserve DOI is the other option. That takes you through a very, very similar process. At the end, you will be given information about what the DOI will be when you come back and fully publish it, but it won't be live yet. But you will also get a private link. So if you want to tie with a manuscript submission and you don't want it to be public until the paper is either accepted or published, you can use this option. With this option, the protocol will continue to be editable. So if you get pointers from reviewers requesting a change, you can still make those changes. And then ultimately you will have to come back, click through to publish, and it will then have the DOI and the successful published protocol scenario. But it's just a way of keeping things private until publication, but giving you the DOI so you can put that into a research article if you are linking it to a research article. So it's very, very, very easy to do. And then you can put the links to the DOI and citations into research articles. So this is how an actual PLOS biology paper looks. This is getting quite dated now, from 2017. These authors actually created a whole collection of protocols. So you can get DOI for individual protocols, and if you've got multiple methods that correspond to an entire research project and a research article, you can gather them all together and create a collection, so a container for all of those protocols, and just have one single DOI for that. And then every protocol within would still have separate DOIs, so each element is still independently citable or referenceable, but you can also then put it into the materials and methods this way. So methods and protocols for all of the experiments are available as a collection on protocols.io. That link will bring you to the collection on protocols.io. What is very nice and gives you as authors more flexibility is that a version of a protocol or a collection on protocols.io will always remain there as it was at the time that you published it, but you can come in and make updates. So you can make a new version, or for a collection, you can make a new version of any of those protocols within the collection and then update the collection. If it has been updated after it's been posted and you follow that first link, you will come here, but you'll always see a notification if there's a newer version of the collection or the protocol available. So we call this dynamic permanence because now you have the power. This will always be here as a static version, but you have the power to dynamically update. So if something needed more clarification, if you did make a mistake, which does happen, you can update that method on protocols.io without needing a formal correction of the paper on PLOS Biology or whichever journal you've submitted to. And that full history of every version will always be available, and anyone who wants to know can do a compare version very easily, so they can see what was changed between the versions that were made available. And then if you click to view the newer version, you'll see the most recent version. So you can see here that was version 2 from version 1, but it may be that there's been multiple versions. It will always bring you to the most recent, but you can always access any of the earlier ones too. So that example on PLOS Biology is not integrated in any way, but we do now have some options that allow slightly more integration with specific journals. So we have a very nice partnership with PLOS One. They created a whole new article type called lab protocol. Doesn't have to be actually wet lab research though, in the same way that PLOS One accommodates pretty much all research disciplines, so too with this if you had a method in a different research discipline. And those lab protocol papers have to have a protocol on protocols.io as part of the methods. So there's a very prominent link to see the protocol, and that's bidirectionally linked with the protocols that are posted on protocols.io. When we have these, they get an extra badge to show that they're peer-reviewed methods, so that they have been a part of the package that was reviewed at PLOS One. Similarly, also that link to the DOI in the materials and method. And this is just wonderful because it means rather than trying to put the method in, a short narrative part of a paper, you have a lovely step-by-step format that you can use on protocols.io to fully comprehensively talk about the methods and what you've done. from those +1 lab protocols, we've got some really nice feedback, and we've done some spotlight interviews with a few of those authors, and they're really happy. And in terms of that kind of getting credit for your method, this is some of the feedback that we've had. So Monica at the top, her protocol and related paper was actually covered by the New York Times, so it got massive media coverage. So she was telling us that she's from a very small country in Latin America, and it made her famous in her countries. And just the visibility of being covered by massive global media outlets is obviously a really big thing. Jacopo, I'm going to show you a little excerpt of a video with him in a minute, but he was just thrilled to share. It was his first ever single author and solo peer-reviewed paper. He was a PhD student at the time, and his is the example that I just had on the previous slide. Definitely not lab research. It was a kind of how to do diagrammatic representation in a kind of archaeological context. So definitely not wet lab research. And then Simon, he is in Germany, and that was his first paper as a senior author. So it's a very nice way of taking methods and things that you're working on and getting a paper for that effort. So this will be the excerpt from Jacopo that I just mentioned. I think I've set it up to share audio. It should work. He also did some wonderful tweets there, but I'm going to play this. It will play for just a minute or so. It's not the full interview. It's an excerpt of him being interviewed.
A visual representation of it, which doesn't change the final product whatsoever. But sometimes if I feel that two ripples look better closer compared to farther away, I'll do it. But we're talking about 2 to 3 pixel distance.
We'll let it run.
It's just me being a bit crazy about it more than anything.
That is great. And looking back also, you know, in the hindsight, now that you've started the postdoc, when you look back in terms of the significance of the lab protocol for your career development, and just looking back, you know, hopefully you're not regretting doing this. Like, how do you feel it fit into your PhD and into the postdoc transition and the reception of the lab protocol paper from your perspective?
I'm extremely proud of it. One of the things I'm really happy about is that, of course, it aided me in the completion of my PhD and me getting a PhD. It's one of the things that, in my specific case, my PhD reviewers were really happy about and were really impressed by. So that's a point of honor for myself. But at the same time, I'm really happy of having it done for my own personal PhD, because it sort of gave a methodological section to it. While, especially in anthropology, is usually research project centered. So a context, a time period, a culture, being able to also develop a method and including a more technical aspect to it, I thought it complemented that really well. And although my PhD was specific to a time period and a region, I managed to add this methodological aspect that sort of went past those boundaries. Another really good thing that I think this protocol has done for my career is the recognition it gave me. As Lenny, you were saying, at first it kind of blew up. Many people started following along and were interested and got in touch with me. I was lucky enough to have been invited to lectures and practical sessions at various universities. And for just a standard, quite niche archaeological method, I think the article right now, after a year, has 4 citations in it, and I've heard of people that are putting together the manuscripts and they've been using it as well, and that's something that I'm very proud of, and I think it has helped my career quite a lot.
So yeah, you can see that, I mean, obviously it wouldn't always be like that, but for Jacopo, this was really a pivotal thing, and very meaningful for his career next steps as well. I don't want that to play again. Don't know why it's going again. In terms of, you know, making protocols available and posting them publicly, sometimes we hear concern that what if you've made it publicly available, will a journal or a Publisher then say, oh, well, we won't consider it because you've already made it public. In fact, well over 500 journals in their instructions to authors recommend and encourage use of protocols.io as part of the manuscript submission. So they are very happy when researchers include a DOI to the full comprehensive method on protocols.io. It means that the research they're considering publishing has more content for review, but also is more likely to be reliable and reproducible in the grand scheme. We have never heard of a case where, because a method was on protocols.io, a journal has said, no, we won't consider your paper now. So it is something that is much recommended. This is only going to become more and more prominent. There are more and more funders who also have in their guidelines recommendations for using protocols.io, either in grant guidelines or in policies. Some even require posting protocols on protocols.io. So it is quite a niche funder, but Aligning Science Against Parkinson's, ASAP, they require of anyone they fund that they will post all of the methods that they're developing onto protocols.io. They really want to foster an entire community of researchers who are sharing their methods alongside any data that they're generating and papers that they're publishing, etc. And then I mentioned institutions can have campus licenses. If you're interested in seeing if you actually have that, protocols.io, I think it's /organizations, there's a drop down where you can see if you do have that or not. If you don't, but you're interested, drop us an email at some point, because we can suggest advocating to a librarian or someone at your organization for recommending that they would investigate that as an option. And this is just a nice kind of highlight how within the context of open research, you can see some really nice tweets just to flag up that it's not just, those plus examples I told you about. In actual fact, protocols.io was acquired by Springer Nature last year. So we now have much more of an integral relationship with Springer Nature and all of their journals. But we are by no means limited to only partnering with the journals from Springer Nature. So these are some tweets from a few other journals just to highlight how people have posted their protocols and then been very excited. So another example of a gigabyte paper with an embedded protocols.io protocol collection in the methods. And this kind of covers a little bit some of the diversity of topics. This is a researcher who's very happy to share that they put their lab protocol on protocols.io, and the paper is actually published in Current Biology. So that's an Elsevier journal. And over on the right, Springer Nature has some open access books with chapters that are methods. And we, way before the acquisition with Springer Nature, had ran a pilot where we posted those methods from the book chapters publicly available on protocols.io as well. So we just see some nice examples, and certainly we're not limited to just Springer Nature. We are working though on integrations into more submission systems, so hopefully you'll see it as an option more and more when you're submitting to different journals in the future. When you have posted a protocol onto protocols.io, it generates a citation for your protocol as well. So you have a DOI, you have authors, a year, and the title of the protocol, and the knowledge that it's on protocols.io. So that's equivalent to journal name. It is possible, this will appear under metadata for the protocol. You can download that as a citation, and that can then be imported into whatever reference management software you're using. And added to reference lists, citation lists. So if you've posted your own and you want the citation for, you can grab it that way. If you're using someone else's, which is publicly available on protocols.io, equally you can grab the citation for their protocol and cite their protocol as a reference when you write up the paper. So in this way, you can start to also track reuse of protocols in a formal way in that citation context as well. But we also have other ways of tracking the reuse. So if you're familiar with that FAIR acronym, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible or reusable, we managed to really hit all of those with protocols.io. And so on that reuse side, we also have for every posted protocol a metrics tab. So you can then see how many views over time for your protocol, how many views of all versions over time. So this is an extreme example where this protocol has been viewed over 250,000 times. How many exports, so how many people have created a PDF that they've exported for their own personal use, just number of steps. You can bookmark them, so how many people have bookmarked because they want to come back and use again. People can create their own forks that they may want to edit and amend just to try and tweak slightly for their own implementation. You can see how many people will have made forks of them and how many comments. That's that dynamic ability to ask questions and post comments onto the protocol. So for this protocol, you can really see that it's been used a lot. Also, how many run records. That's not huge, but if people have been exporting, they're probably not keeping run records. You can also track citations where the protocol has been cited in other papers here. We do not manage to capture all of these because at the moment we're only able to look through open access full text to look for instances of those citations. If it's been forked a lot or you've made a lot of versions, you can also look under forks and see information about what has been done and actually open out and view in a sort of phylogenetic tree view what has happened to the protocol. So for this one, you can see there were 6 public forks, 79 private. And you can actually open it out to see the forks, the versions, how many there are. So it's a very, very nice way of tracking that reuse. So if you then, from that credit perspective, if you want to see the value of the methods that have been shared this way, you can really easily see that on protocols.io. My almost final slide, this is just to note that for some research disciplines, I think chemistry is still does this a lot, but some others too, they still recommend putting methods details into supporting information, supplementary files. There are many issues with using supporting files, supplementary files, in that they are not always archived as well. If they're PDF, they're not searchable and findable. So you really limit the visibility and reuse of a method that way, especially if it is a paywalled subscription-only journal where you're publishing. There is a very nice article in The Scientist that's available, which talks about some of the limitations of this. It's quite old now, but worth taking a look at. Final slide before I move to Q&A and see one more question already, just to highlight the benefits again. I think we've shown that you can increase discoverability with that connections being made between researchers looking at brain cells versus researchers looking at fish parasites, etc. Can massively increase the reproducibility because you're just sharing more information, facilitates those research connections, enables reuse. Overall, it really enhances the value of the research being performed. It's not, I've made a bunch of data, but actually I've never told anybody exactly how I made those data, in which case the data also become limited reuse as well. So you're enabling reuse of all the outputs from any research project when you share the methods. And it's a huge enhancement to the value of research. Talked about that dynamic permanence, the versioning, the ability to update, just makes for much better materials and methods. You can have this better Q&A. You get this interactive ability to ask questions of people sharing methods. Means it's a public FAQ. So rather than receiving multiple emails asking the same question over and over again, if you've answered the questions on the protocol, anyone else who comes along will also see that question and answer. And obviously, you're getting credit for the protocols that you share. So that is it for slides. I will move to Q&A. Let me have a quick look. There were 2, I think I see one in the chat and one in the questions. So I answered the one earlier about how they're validated. Hopefully I answered that one already. Another question, how many protocols can we publish for free? You can publish as many protocols for free as you want. With a free account, you can only have 2 private files. So if you have 2 private files and then you publish one, you can have another private file. So as long as you continually publish, you can keep doing that. Only 2 files is the limitation, which I think can be a frustration. And so that's when we would recommend the paid model. It is possible to just have a single workspace and pay for that individually and have more files that way. But the most cost-effective way, it works out not that much when you think about costs of publishing in general papers. A license for a university would give access to all the researchers at the university, and is probably a much better way of doing it. So I think I've done that one. There was a question in the chat. Do protocols authors have to be the same as the authors of a paper linked to the protocol? No, and that's a key point that I probably should have emphasized. They absolutely don't. The authors of the protocol can be completely different from the authors of the paper. We would assume that you knew one another, but you don't have to be the same. And so, or sometimes what we'll see, I actually have another slide that's really nice in a different presentation that I probably should put into this webinar. What we'll sometimes see is that the paper has, first author Elizabeth, second author Kelsey, but then the protocol, they'll be the other way around. So you'll have a different first author who has clearly worked much more on the method development than the person who then applied the method for the research paper. So they can be completely distinct from one another. And that is one of the main reasons really why it's important to do this, because you guarantee that the individual who was responsible for the method is the person who would get perhaps first author recognition for the method versus the person on the paper. Let me see. If the protocol is private, does each author have the authority to make it public? So no is the answer. The owner of the protocol can make it public. You can share that with other individuals, and you can control the privileges that they have, so the rights that they have. So you can make them like a co-owner or a co-admin, and then they would be able to publish it. Or you can just give them edit rights so that they can only edit, they can't publish. You can also configure a workspace so that you can stop anyone other than the administrator of the workspace from publishing. So if a group leader wanted to check anything before it got made public from that workspace, they could set it up that way. There is all sorts of flexibility around how you would configure and the options that you set up, both at individual protocol level or in a whole workspace. We'll mark that one as done. How many members can be added to the team with a premium account? So if you pay for a single workspace, then you are charged per member of a workspace. So the cost will go up completely correlative with how many people you add to that workspace. If it's an institutional license, it becomes unlimited. We do cost at the moment by the number of people using protocols.io, but they're kind of bands of like 100 to 200. They're large numbers, and it takes a long time before they get maxed out. But once you've paid for a year, it's actually unlimited, and it would be at renewal time that we would look again how many people. But we are thinking about that and whether per person makes sense or whether it should just be a flat fee. But it would be still unlimited. So hopefully that answers that. I think the next one in the chat. Do we need to have an account for each individual, or can we create a single account per lab and all collaborate within the same account? It is not advisable to do that, to have a single account. Your ability to collaboratively edit, simultaneously edit content, if you're all signed in with the same account, would become quite confusing, I think. And you would not be able to track individual history changes that have been made to a protocol. Which what happens sometimes is a user will have a protocol, they'll have made edits, someone they're collaborating with comes in and makes changes. You can see exactly who did what, so you can roll back to an earlier version and know exactly who did what. So you could do it that way. If it's only one or two of you making changes to protocols, then maybe that would work just fine. If it's a lot of different users, it would not be an advisable way of doing it. Imagine if you had a single user account for Google and you were all working on documents, you would not know who owned what or what was where. It would become much harder to track and organize. So personal preference, obviously, but probably not what we would advise you do. And then next question. Can individual members in a team make their protocols public while the others keep theirs private? Yes, absolutely. It's all individual choice. Any protocol will start out as private, but you can make it public when you choose to do so. So any individual user can choose to publish on their own time frame whenever they like. Other content can remain private forever if they want, if you have enough private file allowance. So zero need to make changes to that. Another question for clarity: is publication free? Is access open access? Publication is completely free. Access is open access. Everything's published with a CC BY Creative Commons BY license, which just means that you have to attribute if you reuse, but reuse, redistribution is perfectly allowed, permitted. It's fully open access, essentially. How about publishing PCR primer notes on protocols.io? Is that done or advisable? It's entirely up to you. You can post things and not get a DOI. So you can make content publicly available. So if it's not a part of a publication, but you just want to share things internally within the lab, you can make them public and have links for them that will work. And there'll be kind of a static version, but they won't have a DOI. So if you've got things that you just kind of want to share more of, you can do it that way if you don't need a formal persistent identifier. Again, I mean, I wouldn't say anything was advisable or not in terms of content. That is entirely up to user to make public whatever they want to do. You can flag if something is non-research when you post it. So if it's something that isn't, you wouldn't want to be indexed, you can flag it as not research content that way. If it was something that wasn't a specific kind of bigger output, hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, no, there's no right or wrong really to what you're putting on here, as long as it's part of your research process. That's all good. I should maybe stop the share. I think I've answered everything that's come through. I'm happy to answer any more questions and hang on for another couple of minutes, but if not, we can call it a day. But thanks everyone for joining. We will send, as I mentioned, the recording around. Let me stop the recording actually, in case anyone is shy and